Cool. Hey guys, Michael, 90 plus GAMSAT. This is other Michael Yang. He is a Section 3 gun. He got 97 in Section 3, and he also designed the program that we teach in our Section 3 group shoots. So I recently made a post, and you guys collected some questions that you wanted me to ask one of our tutors, and Michael very graciously popped his hand up to meet at 10:09 at night, and we've got him here. So I'm going to throw these questions at him and see what he says, and hopefully some of it will be useful to you in your preparation. So hi, Michael. Thank you for doing this. Appreciate it, bro.
No worries, anytime. Hopefully I can help the best I can.
Sure you can. So do you want to start with do you prefer to start with the general or the
Yeah, I think general
ones? Okay, cool.
With,
and do you want me to have you got the questions up already?
Oh yeah, I have the questions up right here in front of me.
So the first one was how to annotate difficult texts in a time efficient manner.
Yeah. Well, that depends on different types of stems, obviously, and that's actually one of the major things that we teach in the program. But I just want to tell the students, especially those who are studying GAMSAT prep, don't focus too much on, feeling that don't focus too much on having to learn the information that's being presented. I do feel that a lot of students that I've taught, they always ask me, do I have to read this? Do I have to know this? But I don't know this. I haven't analyzed this yet. In the end, you're marked on whether you get the answer correct or not. So your focus should be on the answer. And therefore, the next step after that should be to find information that's only necessary for the answer. So if you ask me how to annotate those, I first would say, when you first face a GAMSAT stem or a difficult stem with graphs, tables, or images or diagrams, etc., I don't think you should be pressured with time and just rush through or stress about it. I think time management is something that comes naturally. Rather, by changing your approach to not analyzing and learning every single thing in the text, rather than what I like to do is dissect the stem up. So I'm basically trying to answer what information am I given and where are my information located in the stem. So if there's a chunk of text, I'm not going to read everything. I'm just going to read the first phrase or the sentence to get an idea of, all right, this is about, for example, about this specific molecular pathway, for example. Or even if I was looking at a stem with a figure, let's say a table or let's say a graph, I wouldn't necessarily focus on the individual points or the values being given on the table or the graph. I would focus on the figure description if they've got, or maybe the general features of that table or graph, like axes labels or variables involved, headings, subheadings, etc. So difficult text in time efficient manner, if the question is actually specifically focusing on text, like words, paragraphs, I would confidently say, do not read every single paragraph, word for word. As I said earlier, look at the very first sentence, get a general idea of what that text is going to be presenting you, and move on. Because you do not want to waste time.
Section 3 strategy, not Section 1.
Yeah, Section 3 strategy, yes.
Okay. And can I clarify as well? You said time management comes naturally. I think, and perhaps that's not what you meant entirely, but I think for a lot of people, time management's doesn't come naturally in the sense that they find it difficult. Are you saying time management comes naturally when you take this different approach?
Yes, time management. Yeah. Because, having taught a lot of students and just personally myself, I had trouble with time management when I was doing the GAMSAT in my first sitting. And when I recall back, and even when I think about, doing questions back then, it wasn't really because, I was slow in my calculation or I was really just slow in my thinking. It was more because I never had a direction. When I was solving the questions, it was more like me spontaneously just looking, is that the right answer? Is that the right way? So it was like a trial and error approach. So that led to me to, going the wrong direction, having to start over again, assuming something might be correct, but then realizing it's wrong. So again, having to go back. Even if I get to an answer, I face a dilemma where I don't feel like I've reasoned or I have the evidence. It just feels like my gut feeling. So when you go through those things, you waste a lot of unnecessary time. But however, if you do have a structured approach, if you know what you're doing, and if you are able to establish a direction of approach for this question, for this stem, because you're able to take the steps one by one, also they're not just, spontaneous or just gut feeling steps that you just randomly pulled out. It's justified steps. Okay. Then because you're not wasting any time on those, unnecessary mistakes, unnecessary, steps, I feel like in that sense, you will definitely improve with time management. But yes, there are some students, who do find extra difficulty or further difficulty in, for example, mathematics or just interpreting scientific information. In that case, I do, that's why I actually, for this sitting compared to last sitting, I've actually included a mathematics lesson, just for those students, as well as just general tips on mathematics that a lot of students don't really.
Sorry to cut you off, bro.
That's all right. Yeah.
I'm summarizing such a way as to ensure that it's that I've understood and that the people listening will understand. So when you say it's not just, so I hear what you're saying about going randomly and that you go back and forth and that's where the time's wasted. And what you're saying is there needs to be a structured way. And when you said how you answer the STEM, I think what you meant, but what might not have come across to others is because I know that you have ways that you go about different problem types, like you go about graphs a certain way. And so is what you were saying that that you have a structured way of going about STEM types and that leads your thinking rather than it being spontaneous for every STEM? Is that what you meant?
Oh, yeah. Actually, both actually. So I do begin with a structured approach, this general structured approach, a step-by-step approach. I want you to follow these steps.
Okay.
That's for every STEM. But of course, as you look at STEM by STEM, one type of STEM at a time, then we'll look at, graphs or tables. Then we'll look at, what other steps should we add? What other things should we take, place more focus into? For example, when we are looking at graphs, or looking at these different types of graphs, for example.
Can you say what the structure? Sorry, can you say what the structure? Like, would it be too long to say?
Oh no,
structured approach. Because people are probably wondering right now, what is it?
Oh yeah, just 4 steps. So first of all, like to just give you the general 4 steps, it's first skimming the STEM, skimming and dissecting the STEM. Second of all is breaking down the question. And I want students to break it down into some sort of some manner, which is break it down into answer and conditions. Okay. The third step is establishing a pathway. A lot of students do face a problem with, after even breaking the question down, they don't know where to start, or they don't know how to actually, begin going about the question. So third step is establishing a pathway to your answer. And fourth step is really, I wouldn't even consider that, because that's just the easiest part, the last part, which is having all of that set out and getting to your answer. And that last step is
what's the difference between conditions and answer?
Oh, that's
step.
Yeah, because if you look at GAMSAT questions, a lot of questions have in the question itself a lot of different small information. Mm-hmm. So what I call answer is literally and only what does the question want from you? Is it a mass?
Oh, okay.
Is it a concentration value?
Okay. All right.
Is it some sort of reasoning? And the conditions are the little information that you need to consider. You need to identify and consider them in your steps to get your answer correctly.
Okay.
And
then how do you identify your pathway?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So identifying a pathway is, in the end, I recommend you to focus on your answer first, because in the end, you got to find your answer anyway. So I tell my students because we've already skimmed and dissected the STEM down in the first step, you would know what information you presented and where they're presented in your STEM. So here's where you think about, all right, I know my answer is this. This is what I need to look for. Where can I find that in my STEM? Or anything that's relevant to the answer, where can I find it in my STEM? Okay. So if you, for example,
what's the difference between that and conditions? Because didn't you say there's the answer that it's asking and the conditions is the little information that leads to the answer? What's the difference between finding a pathway and identifying the conditions? Or is it just relating how those conditions relate to the answer?
Yeah. So conditions will be just individual values.
Right.
And they won't be organized in any way. They'll just give you those values. And honestly, looking at the conditions, it's quite difficult to, find or realize how they're going to be related, how they're going to even contribute to your answer. But once you find how your answer is being presented, that value, for example, concentration value is being presented in the STEM, then you'll be able to see, there are other variables. For example, temperature. It's a concentration versus temperature graph, maybe. Or maybe there's a rate constant that I need to consider. Mm-hmm. And that's where your conditions get integrated into your approach.
In the interest of getting through a million questions, that was actually really interesting. Thank you. All right, cool. So to go with annotating difficult text. So it's not so much about annotating the text. It's about extracting what's useful and spending as little time on extraneous details that isn't actually a condition or leading to the answer as possible.
Yeah.
Good summary?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right, easy. So you actually just answered the second question as well. How do you filter through the STEM to identify the info that's required to answer the question? So I guess you would just, based on what you just said there, what was step one again? Sorry, can you remind me?
Step one is just dissecting the STEM. So skimming and dissecting.
Okay, skim. Okay, yeah. So you kind of orient yourself. All right, and then so the answer to this, how do you filter through the STEM? It's really just identify what is it asking, what are the conditions that are relevant, and then how do I connect those conditions to the answer, or what bridges? All right. And it seems like, or it sounds like a lot of the difficulty or the bulk of the difficulty would be in, because the other bits are just comprehension. The bulk of the difficulty is with the pathway bit. How do I connect the conditions to the pathway?
Yeah.
And what is that just practice or knowledge of the physical sciences, or how do you
Well, to be honest, to be frank, yeah, you do need some fundamental science knowledge. That's for sure. That's why, non-science background students, they do face that difficulty because all the information is science-based information. However, given that there is some foundational science, or given that there is some understanding of the scientific information, I always tell my students, every step you take, no matter what step it is, you must have a reason for it. So when I go through questions in class together, and they decide to do the question and explain to me the process, I'll ask them like 10 times for each question, why did you do that step? And if they can answer it, then great, I let them go on with it. But a lot of times they can't answer it. And that means they had no reason. It's just a gut feeling. It's just they assumed it might be the correct answer, or it might be the correct way. So yeah, to answer that question, how to establish that pathway, as I said, you obviously want to find where your answer is in the STEM, or how your answer is being presented in the STEM. And yes, you do need to take, multiple steps, but I always ask them, what do you need? What are you missing? So for example, if it's a calculation question with formulas, what's stopping you from getting to your answer? So what value is missing from you right now? And that's going to be your next focus. Pardon?
It sounds like it's being very intentional. It never really occurred to me, like everything you're saying, it's like intent driven, or there's always a reason and trying to establish what is that reason. So interesting. Can I just quickly touch on as well, because I fear or imagine that there is a lot of non-science background students sweating.
Yeah.
Oh no, I haven't got science knowledge. What do you have to say to that?
Science knowledge. Now, it is very different to university science knowledge or high school science knowledge, because in GAMSAT, especially the physics and especially the physical chemistry, they require a lot of calculation, right? Physics and physical chemistry, a lot of Arrhenius equation, a lot of formulas. I think basic mathematical skills definitely, first of all, needs to be established, no matter what. General logarithms, indices, scientific notation, just general algebraic calculations, multiplication, definitely need to be established. Now, once your mathematics is established, then you'll be able to utilize the values into the formulas. If we're talking about, I kind of want to section into biology, chemistry, and physics because they're all different in my perspective. To begin with biology, there's so much information. There is so much information. So with biology, I don't necessarily go through, each single, cellular, pathways, molecular pathways, or proteins or anything. Rather, I give my students a list of, what biology stems could they give me? So if you look at biology, a lot of them, genetics, molecular pathways in flowcharts, or circulatory system, body organ systems, physiological systems. So I kind of give them some, maybe first personal notes, or give them a short lesson on, those small biological concepts. For physics,
hold on, can I just quickly jump in? With biology, it seems to me that a lot of biology is just reasoning in the actual exam. I actually found trying to apply my biology knowledge, because I did phys in my undergrad, actually veered me the wrong way.
Yeah.
So I found that actually pretending as if I didn't know the information actually helped. But the only things that I found in biology that were like pre-required knowledge was mitosis and meiosis, the cell cycle, and Punnett squares.
Genetics,
and genetics. That's really the only topic. So that to me was like the quickest one to know the background sciences in. The rest is really just reasoning.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah, that's exactly why I don't have any biology lesson in my classes, because I just thought there's, first of all, way too much. And as you said,
Mm.
it's there. The information's there in the STEM.
Mm.
Should I move on to physics?
Yeah, go.
Yeah, I personally like physics. And honestly, I never did physics in high school. And I did physics for one semester in my first year of biomed. So I never really liked physics, first of all. But as I was preparing for GAMSAT, as I was learning physics by myself, I right now I can confidently say it's my favorite subject. And that's because I realized I can see physics everywhere in my everyday life. So what I decided to, rather than memorizing values, memorizing concepts, memorizing formulas, for each physics, concept, let's see if I can explain it in reference to an example, in a real life example.
Mm.
And I think that really helped me so much, because physics in GAMSAT, it's not memorization.
Mm.
Apart from the really basic, F equals ma formulas,
Yeah,
a lot of physics information is given. Formulas are given, variables are given.
Mm.
However, it's not just to find this question. It's like they're giving you a scenario. For example, a parachute falling off the sky, or a ball rolling down a ramp. And you have to now apply that physics knowledge. So it's about understanding the application.
Mm.
So that really helped. For example, turning the tap on, why does water flow? Opening a door handle, then we have application of torque. These little examples and applying that physics concept really helped me understand. And it's entertaining. That's why, now I sometimes go on YouTube, watch some physics experiment videos. It's pretty fun. Yeah. And when you find joy in, learning physics or learning any other subject, you don't feel stressed. I don't feel stressed. With other stuff, I feel stressed when I'm learning, but with physics, I don't feel any stress at all, because, it is very interesting and entertaining. So yeah, that's probably what I can say about physics.
All right. And then we were talking about, we're talking about non-science background for chem, organic chem, maths you already said you need. So really it's just chem and organic chem.
Yeah. Chemistry, I would say
high school. Like I did nothing. It was my worst subject.
Oh yeah, same here.
But then I feel like because I studied it a lot and I made a whole list of every topic basically, and then went through every topic start to finish, and then wrote a cheat sheet of all the things I was unfamiliar with. But by the end of it, I found, not entirely, but I found almost that not that I didn't need it, but the main benefit I had by doing it was to know what was reasonable to expect to know. So sometimes they'd give, sometimes I give a PhD level chem stem, and I know enough to know I don't need to know that. They're not giving me this because I'm supposed to know this. This is a red herring, and actually it's just this and this. So it helped me orient myself in the stems and what I felt, what I was expected to know or not. But I didn't use it as often as, I don't know. I'm not sure that the yield was there for the amount of study I did of the background.
Yeah. That's why, as you already know, that all my lessons, I don't really have a specific science lesson. It's more of how to approach those different types of stems. But yeah, for non-science background students, I think there are a few high yield topics. And when I say high yield, I think it's really important of how you study them. Like, you got to study them in a way, not like university, how you're just so focused on calculation, so focused on, substituting values in and getting the correct concentration or pH. It's more of being able to understand the variables that are involved in those physical chemistry concepts. For example, concentration, pH, rate constant, or maybe if we go to oxidation numbers, or maybe even redox equations, the potentials. Why are the potentials positive and negative? It's a lot about reasoning, not just memorizing that they're positive and negative, and negative is the anode, or positive is the cathode, or whatever those are. It's really understanding why.
I found that as well. It's like first principles. Like, because the thing I found when I was studying is I'd go and I get a question wrong, and then I'd go and Khan Academy or whatever, and I'd understand it. But then when the question came the next time, they changed it a bit.
They changed them.
I didn't know it in the new version. I only knew that version of it. And so it wasn't until I went and understood what the things were and understood the first principles that I was able to manipulate it based on my model of understanding. But I definitely found that as well. This is actually probably a good time to, because for every question somebody asked, every section, biology, maths, and all that, someone asked what resources you would recommend.
Yeah.
Is on that?
For if we're solely speaking on science knowledge, establishing our science knowledge, a lot of students do, from what I've heard, do go to Desennial. But what I want to say is, doing decennial questions, yes, they're going to be great at practicing your mathematics, your calculations, your formulas, great. However, as I said earlier, you got to make sure you place your focus on the understanding part. Especially for physics, it's about understanding and being able to apply it to different situations, different examples that they might present to you. So with science, yes, I studied with Des O'Neill. To be honest, I can be honest, right? I didn't really find it that much helpful because they did have a lot of information, but it wasn't, detailed. There was not a lot of examples for me to, be able to actually understand why and how. So what I like to do is, for any science, even just high school textbooks I used for physics, because that's when I first started physics again. Like university resources if you did a science background, but for non-science background students, yes, like online, some YouTube channels. They have a lot of, which ones?
Yeah. I use the gold. You can just be frank. You don't need to. But I use the gold standard work solutions personally to the ACER questions. I thought, what was it, Dr. Ferdinand? They were good. That's what I used when I studied.
Personally, I used, like, just for science concept, I did use Lingenerd. That's for biology, my biology, and for chemistry, I used organic chemistry tutor, chemistry and physics. I used a bit of Khan Academy as well. They're very similar, very good resources. But rather than looking at just calculations first, I did focus a lot on understanding. I don't think I even practiced any calculations up until the later half.
I know one of our other tutors, who I went to undergrad with, he got 100 in section 3, and he's like, understands things very clearly on a first principles basis.
Oh yeah,
and I think that allows you to manipulate it. It works better. Cool. All right, we are. How long have we been on for? Is this record? It doesn't tell me how long it's been recording for. Anyway, it's been a while, so let's press on. When I take my time to complete questions, I'm able to get the correct answer. However, when I'm completing a STEM in time condition, I get less questions done and get wrong answers. Is there any advice you can give other than practicing doing more questions or reading a research paper, because I'm already trying, but I'm not improving? What a good question. I hear this in section 2 as well.
I think that's kind of what we were talking about before. If you take your time, given that you don't have any time restraint, you're going to have the time to go through, let's try this way. All right, it doesn't work. Let's try this method. It doesn't work. And that's probably why. You might go through, a lot of different directions, and you might find the direction at some time and therefore be able to solve it. But obviously, if you're in that time restrained, time pressured environment, you don't have that time to, try different methods, try different directions.
I see that section. Sorry, go.
That's good. Go.
I see this in section 2 a lot. Like, a lot of people, even students, right up to the GAMSAT, will be like, because they're perfectionists, they want to get it right, and so they'll try and produce this incredible essay, and they'll succeed, but then not get the result on the day. And then when we inquire, it's like, what happened? Like, I didn't practice the time. So what you can do in 50 minutes is not what you can do in 30 minutes.
Yeah,
it's like trying to practice for a tennis championship by playing ping pong. It's just a different sport.
Yeah, exactly.
What I say is you've just got to religiously practice to time.
Oh yeah,
and when you do, because that forces you to find, like, you're gonna fail. You're gonna do it bad, but eventually you're gonna get sick of that and then try and find ways to expedite the process under time conditions.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, for example, someone might not be as driven to learn your structured approach in order to save time if they weren't feeling the pain of not having been able to do it to time. But if they force themselves to do it to time. But I know when I initially started, I spent a week on my first paper because I didn't know the sciences. Like, I had to go and research every single thing because otherwise I was going to get nothing. So I think there's something to say to begin with, but at some point there needs to be pretty regular practice under time conditions.
Oh yeah, definitely. Even for section 3, although having that structured approach will give you that, time management skills.
Yeah.
Yes, it is definitely important. You got to make sure you got to do some practice with timing. Definitely.
All right. What was your strategy going into the section 3 exam?
I think that was exactly what I talked about. Yeah.
Oh, the
stems. Yeah.
I think what they were getting at was, like, do you skip if you don't know a stem? Do you skip, or do you try and find the easy answers first? Do you go from start to finish? Do you time yourself and pace? Like anything, like kind of like
actually, meant like on the exam, during the exam. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So not within the question, but just how do you approve the exam?
Okay. So good thing about like comparing my first sitting, my second sitting, like the reason why I was so confident was because I knew which questions I got right or wrong, if you get what I mean.
Mm. I never
So
understood people that say that. Like, must be such a
but,
nerd to know exactly which ones you got right and wrong. Like, that's impressive.
with the questions that
I just have a crack and I just pray.
I was really confident in with some of the questions because I knew my reasoning. I knew that I found the correct method. I knew that I found the correct values. I broken down the question well, and I got my final answer. No doubt about it. I can move on perfectly.
Mm,
And the good thing about this is you can move on and not have to worry about that question being in the back of your mind. You
mm,
know, in my first sitting, like I would get to an answer, be unsure. It always was in the back of my mind, having to go back and check again. And I really hated that feeling. I just want to get on with the questions, even in under a time pressure environment. But yeah, having that structured approach, I think it just helped with my confidence as well. Because
mm.
I know what I did. I didn't just gut feeling, I didn't
Other
just choose my
people
answer
though
on gut feeling.
won't have that feeling. So that's cool that you did. But I would imagine for a lot of people, most people, they're
Yeah,
not
yeah.
that feeling. So
Oh,
what
but
do
yeah,
they do
yeah.
when they don't? Like, do they try and just get easy answers? Do they just work through sequentially?
So for those who, I guess, well, if you do follow the structured approach, I'm guessing it will definitely help. But for those who are having trouble or may want to ask about just generally, should I skip steps or should I skip questions that are hard or, should I take a breather in between?
Hmm.
This might be just something that I do, but I always tell myself every question is the first question.
Okay.
So because of course section 3 is the last section's fatigued and tired, I just tell myself first question, let's go. That's just how I push
Like,
through it.
for what purpose? Like, because wouldn't that make you feel? Wouldn't that make you spend more time on the question than you might otherwise? Because you feel you.
Oh, that's the reason is because I just don't want to think about how many questions I got left.
Hmm.
So I just say, first question. Like to start, let's just think about I just think about it as I'm starting every time, starting over again.
Okay, so you do just work through sequentially, start to finish.
Yes, I do work through, but yes, I even face questions that I didn't know how to solve. And yes, those ones I do skip.
Okay, right.
So normally what I tell students,
Sequentially, but you skip if you feel it's going to be detrimental to your timing.
oh yeah, yeah. So after you skim your system and you break down your question, right? I think this is what you determine. After you break down your question, first of all, can you actually break it down? Or do you just have trouble understanding what the question is asking about? If you really cannot even understand what the question is asking about, skip it.
Mm.
Because the question's there. Once you read it once or twice and you still don't understand it, it's very unlikely you read it the third time, fourth time, you're going to understand it again. So don't waste the time, skip it. If you do understand the question, but you just don't know how to get to the next step, how to establish that pathway, where to start, then again, there's no point of trying to, look everywhere, look here and there in the stem. If you can't, skip it.
I heard previously that an approach was, which I used quite effectively, I found, was instead of looking for right answers, trying to get rid of two wrong answers. And sometimes I wasn't able to find the right answer, but I could clearly go like them two are clearly off by an order of magnitude, or there was something
Oh
else.
yeah,
Like there was a carbon like a chemistry equation.
yeah,
There was more carbons in the outcome than there was in the input. I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense. So
yeah.
I found sometimes that my strategy was instead of just always trying to get it right, if I just got rid of two wrong questions from and then guessed, I'd get 50% right, which would be like a 60 study score, right?
Yeah,
And obviously that I'm going to know some questions. So that
yeah.
was another thing I did for me personally that helped me kind of feel more or less disheartened when I didn't know what the question was about.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think GAMSAT does give answers in that way, two somewhat right answers, two absolutely wrong answers.
Mm.
So yeah, I don't think I use that method a lot, but yes, that's definitely something you can use. Yeah.
I feel like we've actually answered a lot of the other questions in what we've already said.
Yeah.
Next is what's the best way to prepare? Well, I suppose probably less that. Is there a strategy? We've discussed that. A strategy to reduce time taken. We've done that. What separates a low scoring student to a mid scoring to a high scoring? I feel like we've talked about the knowledge of first principles. Would you say anything circles to that?
Not really. I think with this approach, you definitely can get a high score. However, to get, an extremely high score like 95 plus, I think you do need somewhat fundamental understanding of the sciences.
Mm.
Because in the end, it is a science reasoning. exam. So there will be some limitations if you have, absolutely no science knowledge. So for those students, I do recommend, maybe prepping a bit earlier for the GAMSAT and establishing that science foundation first before solving questions.
Okay. How much time do you think, because it sounds like you really improved from section 1 to 3, and it's just in my mind, I'm worried that, I'm just thinking some people are going to listen to this and possibly feel stressed. Am I prepared enough? Am I not, and I'm always looking out for people's mindsets because it gets in the way disproportionately in the exam. So is there an amount of time that you think, or that you studied in between session 1 and 2? Because it sounds like presumably you improved. I don't know what your score was in the first bit, but it sounds like you're a lot more confident in the second.
It's a bit paradoxical, actually, because in my first sitting, I studied like hours and hours. I think I studied probably like 6-8 hours every day just for GAMSAT during that period. Because I think of my first sitting, it was a lot of pressure as well. Like I really wanted to do well and didn't go so well. I think I got a 69 unweighted, I think. So compared to the amount of study I did, I didn't go so well. And in section 2, I actually studied a lot less. I think I did, in terms of number of questions, I think I did around 20 to 30 questions every day.
That's still quite good.
I think it roughly equates to around 1 to 2 hours a day, depending on how I go. But that's including the revision. Obviously, you got to revise it properly immediately. But yeah, I never stressed myself with, section 3.
So did you get 69 overall or 69 in section 3?
For my first sitting?
Yeah.
I got overall.
Right, okay. That's still pretty good. By most people's standards, that's pretty good. All right. But how much did you get in section 3 on your first sit?
78.
Oh, so you did. You went up significantly, like 20 points.
In the first sitting?
Yeah. I mean, you went up because you got 97 in your second, didn't you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's, wow. Yes. Okay, so, right. So it's interesting. I see this in section 2 as well. A lot of people, or I see it the other way around. A lot of people for their first sit for section 2, they don't do anything. They just have a crack. And then they sit again with heaps of preparation. And so like you'll often find that it'll be the same or go down. And the reason is the stress. The first time they just didn't care. You can't think and flow and write under pressure. I mean, obviously there's a sense of pressure in the exam, but there's also ways of framing the test and preparing that let you kind of lean on work that's been done that kind of supports you, that you can, it's almost like on the day for me, it was standing on the shoulders of giants in the sense that I've done so much work and preparation that I was just utilizing that. Yeah, for a lot of people, they go backwards. So for you, it sounds like, what do you attribute? 20 extra points is significant.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you did less. Like, is it just that it was different study? Like, what changed?
In my first sitting, I did a lot of science study, actually. Because being like first year of university, I knew that I thought I had lacked in science knowledge. So I did a lot of science study and ended up realizing that was absolutely useless. Like, I don't think I used anything I learned or prepared for science actual exam. So yeah, I actually walked out really frustrated. Like I wasted so much time studying, every single science topic I can, biology, chemistry, physics, and ended up not even using it. In my second sitting, I did barely any science study. I think I just did
speaks volume, doesn't it? You do no science studying to get a higher mark. That really just tells you it's about reasoning.
Exactly, yeah. And I focused really on how was I, perceiving the question and how was I actually going through the question? Because I wanted to know, was I actually, when I go through the questions, was I actually going through it in the correct way? Was I actually reasoning my way through? Because that's what the exam's about, science reasoning. Or was I just, guessing, estimating, assuming? And I realized when I first, thought about that and did some papers or did some questions, I was pretty surprised at how I could not answer why I did these steps. So what I actually did was I'll go through the questions and I'll write down my steps, right? The steps that I took in dot points. And then after when I was reviewing, I'll ask myself, why did I do that? And I couldn't answer it. So from then I knew it was just based off gut feeling. So that's when I was like, no matter how many times I practice, how many thousands of questions I go through, if I was to go through it in this way, it's not going to work. It's just going to train my gut feeling, how I go with my, just guessing and assuming. So that's when I focused on, how should I actually, ideally approach these questions? And, it took a lot of, I edited the structured approach many times. I first began with a seven-step approach, actually, 8-step approach, and realized that was way too long. So I started editing it down, adding things, removing things. And that's
fascinating. What you're talking about is exactly what I did for section 2 that led to like, this is so interesting to hear, like about like, because I realized that I had to have an iterative, like, I realized that if I just created an essay from scratch every time and all the variables changed, maybe a tutor would give me a bit of feedback, but if I went and everything else changed, I might take 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. So I needed to have a controlled environment where everything was the same and structured, and I just changed that one thing to assess if that change made an overall difference. So I was able to iterate in a way that was constructive. And there was also like, adjusting my little methodology. Do I change the? And it's so interesting that we did similar things in different sections, and it worked. Funny. All right, brother. I'm afraid that this video is getting a bit long, and I wanted this to be a more short, useful thing. So let's end it there. Thank you so much. That was, I think, going to be really good for students.
Hopefully.
That they can access and begin and any last bits of advice or?
Well, I just want to reemphasize, it's not a science exam. It's GAMSAT for section 3. So for those who are maybe stressed about, studying science for it, I would, change my mind. Take a different perspective. Look at section 3 with different lens.
But don't focus.
Oh yeah, of course you need a little. You need foundations, but it's not a science exam. You're not going to be rewarded on knowing every science concept.
There's that saying you hear sometimes that it's not a science exam. It's a reasoning test in the language of the sciences.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right, man. We're going to bounce. Thank you so much for the time. I will
get
YouTube and upload it. I'm sure it will be very helpful to people.
Hopefully.
Cool. All right, bro.